هذا نذير من النذر الأولى أزفت الآزفة.
Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Thumma ma ba'd, a'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim, bismillahir rahmanir rahim. So, now, in the last few sessions, we've discussed one of the major key events in the life of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam that prepared him for the beginning of the Qur'an, the beginning of revelation. And we talked about this is going to be a huge event, like it's going to be a massive event which is going to be coming up. So today we're just going to be talking about moving on to the next section, which is going to cover the time when the Quran started to come down. The revelation started for the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And just to start off with just a brief introduction. So like we said previously, we said that revelation is going to be like a massive event, basically a big event for the whole world when revelation comes to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Because we said for 600 years, the doors of revelation had been closed. Guidance had not come down directly from Allah. The reopening of these doors, like these doors are going to open again 600 years later. Revelation is going to come down from Allah to a messenger. And this event, it requires preparation, and we talked about this. And when we consider that, these doors, so we're just calling it doors of revelation, like they're about to be open again, the message that's going to be delivered is the final message. That's it. There's going to be no message after this. So for the final time, revelation is going to come down on earth from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then it makes you realize, right, like how much of a big event this is going to be. And this marked, like we said, the final communication to humanity from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this responsibility is going to be then, it's going to change the shape of history of the whole world, change human history basically. And the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we said, up until this point, so now, he's what, just about nearly 40 years old. Before this, he's led a very productive life, a very productive life. So when he grew up, just growing up, like we mentioned, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he experienced a wide variety of events and circumstances, like positive and challenging circumstances. Like as a child, what happened to him? He suffered loss, isn't it? Like he was an orphan. Like his dad was already passed away when he was born, and his mum died when he was very young. Growing up, he grew up, he worked as well, he socialized, and he was like a main part of the society, like a really important part of the society he lived in. He was a key member of the society that he lived in. And despite these experiences, he was protected by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as well. And we talked about this, that he was divinely protected by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. How? From falling into any major sin or evil or corruption, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he protected him. And we talked about, for example, like what happened when he walked to the party and a couple of times as a young man and how he just fell asleep before he could go and listen to, the sounds and the music that was going on and whatever was happening there. So as a young man, Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he matured into an intelligent and trustworthy individual. So he became a successful businessman as well, and he never was dishonest or he never did inappropriate behavior as well. As in his business as well, he conducted all his work, all his business with honesty. And he married, what happened? He married like an intelligent, caring, and considerate woman as well, Khadija radiallahu anha. And together they raised a family and they built a stable home. So this was him growing up. And then what happened after this? So at this stage, the Prophet ﷺ, his attention turned outward towards society. So once he built a home, he became concerned about the outside world. So he became concerned about what was happening outside. So just imagine, first he was very concerned about building a family. He built a family and he built a home. And after he'd done this, then he turned his attention outside, what was happening outside in society. And he became very concerned, basically, about the state of the people. Like what's happening, there's widespread corruption, issues are plaguing people's lives. So he was very concerned about what was happening in society around him. And he always had been very active, like socially, he'd been very active in his community because he participated in lots of initiatives. And we mentioned like the Hilful Fudul, the Pact of Virtuous Justice. And he played a major role as well in the reconstruction of the Kaaba as well. So he did help out, like in major issues, in major events which happened in society. He was a part of that, and he did help out. He played a major role in that. But his concern for, the spiritual and the condition of society, like what was happening outside, it led him to moments, like we said last week, of reflection and being alone, solitude, like you could say. It led him to being alone. And during these moments, he thought about what's the realities of life, like what's the purpose of life, what's the purpose of existence, what's the truth of what's happening outside. And we said this led him to the cave of Hira, right? And we mentioned this last session, that this was about 3 miles outside of Mecca. The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he discovered like a secluded cave up in the mountain, and the cave was perfectly suited. It provided a view of the Kaaba as well from its entrance, but it was hidden as well from the sight of others. And it was small, large enough for one person, and offering like it was the ideal environment to be alone and to contemplate and think really, to be secluded and for meditation. And the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he found peace in the cave, and that was the thing. And he found calmness away from what was happening in society at the time. And he began going there regularly, bringing food. We talked about this, dedicating himself to meditating, reflecting, and the prayer. And the narrations mention that this habit of being alone occurred during the month of Ramadan. So again, like we said, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chose this to happen in Ramadan. And this tradition, like we talked about, it later established the i'tikaf. You know the i'tikaf that we said, like in Ramadan, like when you isolate yourself in the masjid for worship, during the last 10 nights of Ramadan, you're alone basically, right? You see, this comes from the practice of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam isolating in the cave of Hira during Ramadan. So you see the link there. And even before the first revelation, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he found isolation and reflection, which prepared, what did it do when he was isolating? It prepared his heart, his mind, his soul, for receiving revelation. And this brings us, having said all of this, it brings us to the most crucial, important moment in human history, the day when it all began, the beginning of revelation, the day the Qur'an was revealed to the Prophet ﷺ. This is about to come. But before this, like we discussed at the end of last session, revelation started to come to the Prophet ﷺ in another form. Before the actual revelation, before the beginning of divine revelation, there was another form of revelation coming down to the Prophet ﷺ. And what was this? What was this other form? This was true dreams. True dreams. So, this is what happened. And we'll just talk about this for a while. There's a very famous, beautiful hadith mentioned by Imam Bukhari in his famous collection, Sahih al-Bukhari. The first chapter, so in al-Bukhari, the book of the hadith, the first chapter of the book begins with a very famous, well-known narration. Innamal a'malu bin niyat. Innamal a'malu bin niyat. The actions are judged only by intentions. And afterwards, the chapters of the book, it covers various topics, including the chapter on the beginning of Revelation, which comes in the book of Bukhari, right? Babul Ba'd al-Wahi, the chapter of the beginning of Revelation. And Imam Bukhari, he records a narration from Aisha, radiyallahu anha, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala be pleased with her, who said, like she was the wife of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, she says, the very first aspect of divine revelation which came to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was true dreams. So this is true dreams came first. There was a period where the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he was getting true dreams for a continuous regular time. Like before the start of actual revelation, the first aspect of revelation to come to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, it was true dreams. Ruya as Sadiqa, true dreams. These dreams were amazing. So these dreams the Prophet ﷺ was getting, they were really extraordinary. What would happen is like it would happen exactly what he saw would come true. So for example, like if he saw something in a dream at night, the next day, that very thing that he dreamt about, the Prophet ﷺ dreamt about, that would come true exactly how he saw it in the dream. Like this happened like continuously, like day after day. And this phenomenon, this began occurring with amazing frequency, like, from minor events to significant occurrences. So you can imagine, he's dreaming, whatever he dreams comes true. And according to some narrations, the Prophet ﷺ, he even dreamt about his encounter with the angel Jibreel alayhi salam in the cave of Hira. Like he even had a dream of this, that he's going to be meeting with the angel Jibreel. and the revelation is going to come to him. Like he even had a dream about this before it actually happened, and that's what we understand. And the Prophet ﷺ, he shared these dreams with his wife, Khadija radiallahu anha. So, in this time, so you can imagine, the Prophet ﷺ is having these dreams. So he tells his wife, Khadija radiallahu anha, he tells her, I am witnessing these extraordinary things in my dreams. And what did she do? Like she consoled him. She offered him reassurance. She said, don't worry, everything has a meaning, everything has a purpose. Like she's quite wise, she's clever. She realized that there's a great plan here. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is putting in place for the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And as she said, don't worry, everything has a purpose. And soon the meaning and the purpose of this is going to become clear to you. Don't be afraid of what you're experiencing. So this is amazing advice. Again, the wife is giving to her husband, and it shows what sort of wife she was. And the dreams the Prophet ﷺ was consistently having came true, basically. And scholars have even discussed at length, like, what was the purpose of these dreams? Like, why was the Prophet ﷺ having these true dreams? They note that dreams, as described in Islam, right, in Islamic tradition, they're a form of divine revelation. Like, for example, another example is Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam. What did he see in a dream? He saw the command to sacrifice his son, Ishmael alayhi salam, as mentioned in the Qur'an. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he mentions, is translating, surely I see in my dream that I am sacrificing you. That's what Ibrahim alayhi salam said, and that's recorded in the Qur'an. Dreams serve as a means for Allah. He communicates to his prophets through dreams. And in the case of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, these dreams played a major role in preparation for receiving revelation. So again, we talked about this before, that what was the purpose, the reason the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam he saw these true dreams? One key purpose, right? One thing we've just mentioned is to help the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam to learn to trust his heart and trust his instincts. Because if you think about it, by witnessing these true events, like he's realizing, he has a dream and it comes true, he develops very strong confidence in the messages he's receiving, right? Like he knows this is not some kind of just random chance. He knows that I'm getting these for a reason. He develops a strong confidence. So this process, it removes any doubts he has, any fears he has about how true his experiences are. And these dreams made him believe that these true experiences would happen. And because of this, he gained confidence, right? That his visions are true. Therefore, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is preparing the Prophet ﷺ to really focus deeply, trust his inner guidance, reflect in his thoughts, and making him even stronger. Even stronger, why? To get him ready for the massive task to receive the Qur'an, to receive the divine revelation. This is a preparation, and this is like one of the main reasons why these dreams are coming down. And then he's going to get this massive task of receiving guidance, receiving revelation, and spreading this to others. And Aisha, radiallahu anha, she also says the Prophet ﷺ would not see anything in a dream except that it came to pass as clearly as the morning. It always came true, like we said. So again, we are talking about still preparation. And how, right until the last moment, up to receiving the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is still preparing the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam through true dreams. So all life, so like we said, all life, since the birth of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he has been, everything has been in preparation throughout his life up until the moment of receiving the Quran, like we talked about. So because of this, what happened because of these dreams, these true dreams the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is receiving? The reality of his dreams, like because they're so real, it led him again to find moments of reflection and be alone yet again, because he was continuing his desire to think deeply about his experiences. What's the meanings behind these? Why am I getting these? And naturally, this desire, it led him to reflect and again visit the cave of Hira yet again, which he knew. But now, this time, he knows about the cave, isn't it? Because he's been there before. So, up until this point, the Prophet ﷺ, he knows the cave for about 2 years. We talked about this before, like he found the cave, about 2 years back. So now, he's getting daily dreams. And think about it. If you were in that situation, like you're getting daily dreams, and in the morning, in the daytime, they were coming true, right? And this happened for a number of weeks continuously, you would naturally think, what's going on? This would be the biggest thing in your mind all the time. Nothing else is going to be important. This is going to be right bugging your mind, isn't it? Like for continuously, I'm getting these true dreams. So right now, the Prophet ﷺ is at this stage. He's now 40 years old. So naturally, now he's going into the cave now, even more often, to reflect on what's happening. And in the cave, he found peace and like an isolated environment to meditate and reflect again. So in the quiet and stillness of the cave, he prepared for this moment of divine revelation. And finally, just to mention today, just one more thing, that this concept that we talked about last time of tahannuth. No, we talked a bit about this word like previously last time, and I'm just going to finish off on this, that we introduced this in the last session. What is tahannuth? Tahannuth, we said this is used to describe what the Prophet ﷺ was doing in the cave of Hira. And it's been discussed by scholars, like what was he doing? This is called tahannuth. Tahannuth, it refers to acts of devotion, reflection, like a deep, like searching for the truth and guidance, like really wanting to find truth and guidance. It is like marking the beginning of his journey as a final messenger. But the word tahannuth, right? This comes from, so like in Arabic, like every word has a root. Root meaning three letters in that word. Those root letters mean something. So in this case, tahannuth comes from the root word hanath, right? The ta at the beginning is extra. So tahannuth comes from the word hanath, and in the Arabic language, which means to break a promise. Like you break a promise or you break an oath, that is what hanath means. Like you break a promise. So, for example, if someone makes a promise, like I make a promise, and you don't fulfill it, like I don't fulfill my promise, that means I've committed hanath. I've broken my promise. So, you leave behind your promise. So, for example, like I promise I'm going to give you your car back tomorrow. Like I make a promise, I'm going to give you your car back tomorrow. But what happens tomorrow? I break the promise, I keep your car for a whole week. For a whole week, I keep the car. That means, what have I done? I've broken the promise. I have done hanath, right? I've broken my promise. So, in other words, I've broken the promise. I've left behind what I promised you. I've left behind the car. I did not give you the car back, right? This is the concept. So the root hanath, it means to break a promise, and this is the root of the word tahannath, right? So literally, it means to like leave behind. So what's the longer word tahannath got to do with breaking a promise? So this is what the Prophet ﷺ was doing in the cave. What does that mean? So tahannath, it means like departing away, pulling away from something. Like leaving behind, like I left behind that car because I broke the promise. Likewise, the Prophet ﷺ, he began to do tahannath. He began to pull away. He began to depart. Depart from what? Right? He was pulling away from what? In the cave, he was doing tahannath. He was pulling away. He was distancing himself from the corruption, the idolatry, idol worship, all the chaos, everything that was happening in society. He was pulling away from that. He was isolating. He was reflecting, right? So you understand? Is that clear? This is what tahannath means. And this is what the Prophet ﷺ was doing, right? Pulling away from all the corruption and the chaos that was happening in society. And this act of pulling away, tahannath, is very significant. And just to mention one more thing, imagine something very valuable, like, for example, jewelry or a watch, right? Imagine your watch or imagine your jewelry, like your ring or your necklace. Imagine if it falls into mud, right? Imagine if it falls into mud. To clean it, what do you think that you can get some water and you can pour it over the mud to clean the jewelry? Is that going to work? If you got some water and you poured it into the mud and you think, oh, I'm going to clean my jewelry, I'm going to clean my watch, and you put water into the mud, is that going to work? Right? Obviously not, because if you pour water over mud, right, the mud is going to thin. It's going to thin slightly, but it's not going to clean your jewelry, your object, because that's still going to be in the mud, right? Your ring is still going to be in the mud. Like you can't just pour water over it into the mud. It doesn't make sense. Pouring water over mud is just going to make things worse. Instead, what must you do? Like, how do you clean your ring? What must you do first? First, you must lift the ring out of the mud, right? Lift the object out of the mud. Now it's out of the mud, away from the filth. Then you have to wash it thoroughly. Then you wash it. Then you get your clean ring. You with me? Similarly, what did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala do first? He removed the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Like imagine, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is like that jewel, right? He removed him from the mud of society. The society, just imagine it's like mud, right? He removed the Prophet ﷺ from the mud of society, from all the corruption, all the distractions, right? Now he removed him and he's like in the cave, right? Do you understand? He's away from society. Now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to clean him spiritually, emotionally, and intellectually. Now he's going to get cleaned, right? You with me? Does that make sense? And the Prophet ﷺ, that's why this act of tahannuth to break away from society is very, very important because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is cleaning the Prophet ﷺ spiritually in this way. He's reflecting and he's going to receive guidance in this way, right? Because he has to be away from the mud and he's the jewel, and then he can be cleaned when he's away from the mud, then he can be ready for revelation. So inshallah, I hope that is clear. So this in effect, like we said, this is what tahannuth is, this phase of life for the Prophet ﷺ. And this phase of life is not just about physical isolation, like, but is part of a very important process of emotional, spiritual, intellectual, physical preparation, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is preparing the final messenger to receive the message and convey the message through this act of tahannuth, from removing him from like the mud of the society and distancing him from what was happening, and so he is alone and he's going to get purified by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Inshallah, I hope that's clear. And some scholars have even narrated or said the broader interpretations of tahannuth, it explains that it means to focus and prepare yourself as well. And just finally, Aisha radiallahu anha, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala be pleased with her, she offered an explanation saying the Prophet ﷺ would withdraw from society into the cave and engage in acts of worship, reflection, and focus. And for this, we learn that the Sahaba, the companions of the Prophet ﷺ, they understood worship to mean more than just prayer, for example, right? Because they saw pulling away from bad situations, reflecting on your spiritual state, meditating, contemplating in Allah as acts of worship. So for them, worship is not just your prayer, but it's all physical acts, and it's all your, pulling away from bad situations is also worship, meditating, thinking about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And these practices are very, very important, in how the Sahaba, the companions of the Prophet ﷺ, they used to worship and they were giving time for these activities. And Aisha radiallahu anha, she mentioned the Prophet ﷺ would spend many consecutive nights in the cave of Hira, worshipping and reflecting until he returned to his family to get more supplies, more food. So the only reason the Prophet ﷺ would come down from the cave is when he ran out of food, basically. He ran out of supplies and he would prepare more, come back down, prepare more supplies, go back up to the cave. And this continued until one day, while he was in the cave, the truth, al-haq, came to the Prophet ﷺ. And next session, inshallah, we're going to talk about the start of revelation and actually some very important, critical life lessons we're going to learn from the events, from the encounter the Prophet ﷺ has with the angel Jibreel in the cave of Hira. So the next session is actually going to be very, very important. Probably the most, I'd say, single most important lesson we'll do in the Seerah up until now, in terms of what lessons we're going to learn, like some amazing lessons as well. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us the understanding and the ability to practice what we've talked about, and may He give us a love for the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and an eagerness to learn about his life, and the ability to apply the lessons we've talked about as well, and from the Seerah, apply these into our life, and take the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam as a role model. Subhanaka Allahumma wa bihamdika nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk.